from thin air. This is the stunning photosynthesis reaction, and there's a few things that are important here. First of all, it's taking CO2 and making this sugar molecule. It also needs water, quite a bit of water, and sunlight's important. It gives off this waste product called oxygen, which we might find useful as well. And this sugar can then be made into various plastics. Whoops, what have I done there? Right, various plastics. Some of them these are natural plastics, like, for instance, cellulose. Emitting more people all the time. Why is this not working? So this is a rough diagram of what mass of the tree consists of when it's alive. So there's a lot of water in the tree, and I must say that these proportions will vary from tree to tree and from species to species, and that will be the case for a lot of the slides that I'm showing. But this gives a good idea of, over half of the weight of a growing tree is water, and that's important for lots of reasons, including the photosynthesis. This is, I've labelled sort of wood. Well, that's the actual dry weight of the wood of the tree. But there's also leaves and twigs. I should probably include bark into there, and there's roots as well. And this thin slither here, the minerals, which are actually taken from the ground. And I suppose what this is telling you is what you actually see above the ground is a good estimate of how much carbon dioxide has been taken out of the atmosphere. So if you've got a big tree, there's a lot of carbon dioxide in there. Another way of thinking about this is if you took that tree there and chopped it down and burnt it, how much residue would you have left? Well, the ash is basically the weight of the minerals that it's taken out of the ground, in broad terms. Now, this graph's quite interesting and important. This shows the how much carbon dioxide the tree takes up over its lifespan. Unfortunately, it's not very clear, but there's a few things to note. One is that it starts off here. Can you just see? Can you see my cursor when I'm doing this, Jackie?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
Right, okay. It starts off here at 10 years old. It doesn't go down to 0. And as the tree grows, the dotted green line shows how much carbon dioxide it's taking up per year. And it maximizes out for this tree at around about 50 years old, perhaps 60 years old. Again, it will be highly dependent on species. And then whilst this tree's alive as a mature tree, from year 60 right the way through to year about 250, 260 here, you're taking up about the same amount of CO2 per annum each year. And then as the tree reaches the mature and veteran stage over here, it starts to decline, and it's taking up less and less carbon dioxide per year. So you can see that there's a massive benefit from absorbing carbon dioxide in this red area, with a much less benefit in the green area. Now, this matures at around 250 to 300 years old, which is probably pretty average for something like sycamore or ash or beech. If it's an oak tree, this line would be twice as long, so it would start declining at 500 years probably. If it was a cherry or rowan, you might get the decline at 120 to 150 years, so it would just be a short period of time when it's actually absorbing CO2 at its maximum. This graph has been used by foresters, and this grey dotted line here shows the benefit of for timber purposes, and basically this point is when you should harvest the tree for timber, which is about 50 years old. So the tree hasn't actually maximized its carbon dioxide uptake with that. This graph will be slightly different for conifers and different for each species, but the broad shape of it will be very similar. This tail off for ancient trees, for oak trees, will be very, very slow, whereas for shorter lived species like cherry or rowan, silver birch, then it will be much sharper decline. And I'll be coming back to this graph at various stages. So once a tree dies, it doesn't just give up its carbon dioxide, it's still captured in the dead wood, and that can remain in the captured and taken up for some considerable time, depending on what happens to the tree. If it falls into a lake and gets smothered in mud, and there's some good examples at Ernest Settle Creek of that happening, then that potentially that carbon could be captured for centuries or even thousands or millions of years in the case of fossilized trees. So just coming on to the uses for wood, I've tried to put this in order of importance. So construction timber is probably the highest usage of wood. That tends to be softwoods, tends to be sort of intensive forestry, and tends to be from the higher latitudes. I've put down here high valued timber, and for that I mean things like solid wood, furniture, tool handles, anything which is flooring, like oak flooring, anything which is going to be probably hardwood rather than softwood. Paper products and packaging is an important thing. I've got firewood down here. Firewood is probably not a huge amount of wood at the moment, but there are moves to make it more of a product as far as things like burning wood and wood products in power stations. Charcoal is an interesting one because that's a relatively small area for us in the UK, but worldwide it's quite an important means of cooking. And if you're looking at developing world countries, charcoal is an important fuel where they're not on the grid, no gas, and sometimes the only means of cooking. Environmental deadwood, that's all the stuff that falls to the ground and just lies there to decay. I would include things like when the foresters harvest timber, they will tend to just harvest the trunks, take all the branches off, and they will get left for environmental deadwood. And even with softwood species that decay fairly rapidly, there's always a supply of deadwood in the forest. And I've included other products here, fibres and textiles and cork, weaving products. And these tend to be fairly niche markets, but it wasn't so long ago that a lot of these were quite important markets. And it's interesting that a lot of the functionality of these products have been taken over by oil products. So whereas we used to use turpentine, we now use white spirit. Cork, you don't get corks now, you get plastic corks. and what I'll go through next is how each of these and how it's affecting our CO2 emissions. So, let's see. So construction timber, quite an important useful wood. It does actually lock up carbon dioxide for quite some time, because when you build a house, they're around for 50, 100, 150 years, maybe longer. I'm not sure about the houses that are being built at the moment. Maybe they won't last 50 years, but potentially that's a significant amount of time to lock up the carbon dioxide. And we're really looking for products that are going to stick around so that the carbon dioxide is not released. Interesting here, less than 40% of the trees become useful timber. Now, people are also often shocked about this, but trees grow round. When it goes through the mill, they get cut square. That's part of the 40%. The rest is the branches and all the other stuff that comes off the bark, sometimes the sapwood as well. Extraction of lumber from the forest invariably uses fossil fuels in production and transport. Most of the softwood used in construction comes from forests that are sustainable. They're replanted and regrown. Certainly the Scandinavian forests are like that. There's still a few virgin forests, mainly in northwest of the United States and northwest Canada, which are felled for timber. But generally, it's generally sustainable, and more and more the offcuts and the waste wood are used to fuel the mills or firewood and get used in other products. So that's construction timber. Generally pretty good, because it's locking up CO2 for a long time. And by the time the next tree has grown, the first tree might still be in the building that it was cut down for. The photo down on the bottom right is the tallest building that is structurally made of wood. Needless to say, it's in Norway, and they have been building taller and taller buildings out of wood. The Grenfell fire did not help their cause, but they have means of treating wood and sealing wood to reduce the fire risks in these buildings. So there are new designs, hopefully putting more wood to replace other high carbon products like cement and concrete, and steel as well. So high value timber, mainly hardwoods, both tropical and temperate. These are probably, they can be sustainable, but many are not. And there's a real problem, as we know, with the Amazon. With these, less than 25% of the trees is used for timber. That's largely because they tend to have a trunk which branches earlier than the conifers, and therefore there's more upper limbs, which is not useful for timber. And the uses of this is things like furniture and marine use and that, with a potentially very much longer lifetime, but it is variable because a lot of the hardwoods are used for things like pallets, because they're grown in developing countries and that's all that they've got. The chair in the bottom right is 500 years old, still going strong. Not one of mine, I would say. Right, paper products. Again, softwood used for these. They tend to be recycled or waste softwood, but sometimes it's just trees that are felled for paper pulp and cardboard. Most of the paper products are used in packaging in cardboard, and you would expect that the amount of packaging has been going up. That's not been the case in recent years, and you have to ask why that's the case, since we've been buying more stuff online and requiring more packaging. And I think the answer to that is that although there's been an increase in packaging, that increase has probably been taken up more by oil products and plastic packaging, which is a worry for plastics side of in the environment, but also it means that we're not actually recycling our CO2 from timber. We're digging it out of the ground and putting it into plastics. So a little bit of a worry there about paper products. The firewood market, not a massive market at the moment. But other parts of the world, it can be important. I don't know whether anyone knows anyone who's got a pellet burner, but I know one person in the UK and about 3 people in France that have got pellet burners. And I know far more people in the UK than I know in France, so it's obviously much more popular in the continent. But that's one product that makes wood a viable option for domestic fuel. There's some air pollution issues with this. Those are partly overcome, but not entirely. It's important to consider production and transport costs. And the classic one for that is the Drax power station that was converted from coal to wood products, only to find that there wasn't enough wood products in the UK to keep it going. So they import wood chip from America with a huge amount of carbon footprint that involves. And I've put charcoal in there as well because though we don't use much of it, it is used a lot in developing countries. And there's potential for using charcoal to replace coal in some industrial uses and also in biochar. For that, let's just say that. Photosynthesis, not photosynthesis, yes. Oops. Just try to. Okay, deadwood. Basically, we have standing deadwood or fallen deadwood. The main benefit of deadwood is for great biodiversity. It's great for bugs and insects, invertebrates, fungi, and lots of creepy crawlies and things. There is small chance of long-term carbon storage, and some wood, well, most woods take quite a while to decay. Quite often you'll see fallen trees in the woods and you'll think, how long have they been there? Well, some of them have been there 10 years, maybe 20 years or even longer. So deadwood is an important store for carbon. And I've just tried here to go through priority-wise of how what we need to do for immediate carbon storage. So this is to remove carbon dioxide in 2023. And top of the tree, so to speak, is to keep existing young, mature to veteran trees. So any of the trees that are at the top of that curve are extracting carbon dioxide from the environment at the maximum rate, and that is storing carbon right now in this year. Ancient trees, because they fall off very slowly, they're still absorbing carbon. So they're still actually taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and they come second on the list. deadwood and standing deadwood is keeping that carbon in the environment, locked up into the soil and out of the atmosphere. And then you come into keeping things like long lifespan wood products and using wood more in construction to replace the carbon intensive products like concrete and steel as well. And that's really to try to it's taking carbon out of the atmosphere rather than with concrete and steel where you're putting it into the atmosphere. And I've got down at the bottom, use wood as a fuel, but it needs to be sustainably used. And there are issues there about wood that's transported long distances. Some of the kiln dried timber uses a lot of fuel to dry it. And also, especially in Europe and the UK, wood burners tend to be used as like a luxury heat. So your house might be heated to an acceptable temperature by gas central heating. You'll come home on a wet and cold day and light the wood burner just to give a little bit of immediate heat and flame. Now, whether that is actually replacing carbon or just putting more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which wouldn't happen if you didn't have that, is a moot point. So that's for this year's capturing carbon. You may note on there that there's nothing about planting trees. And that is because the first part of that graph that I showed you, the first 10 years, planting trees, you have to transport them, seedlings, you have to water them, all of which can be using fossil fuels to do. So there's no benefit immediately from planting trees. If we look at more long term, and this isn't very long term, this is only 30 years time, he says, and look at what the benefits are for this. Well, again, top is keep existing trees, because those trees are still at the top of that curve. They're still absorbing carbon dioxide at its maximum. They're doing the job that scientists have had real problems trying to duplicate in a synthetic way, and that's taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and storing it permanently. Go to the second on the list is to keep the ancient trees, and encouraging deadwood is also good. It's only when you get down further down the list that you need to plant young trees, and that's because of that curve. 30-year-old trees still haven't got to the stage where they're absorbing most carbon from the atmosphere. They're still getting towards their full potential for that. And then some of the lesser methods of long-term results for carbon storage, developing fossil fuel replacement products, and recycling timber rather than just burning it, which is common. Now, it may be that some of these will vary, because if, for instance, we start using wood to produce wood alcohol or methanol, that may be an important fuel for the transport options where we can't use electricity, like lorries, tractors, and aircraft. I think and that's looking at the carbon, both short-term and long-term capturing. There's a couple of other reasons why we may be wanting to plant trees now. One of those is to encourage the trees or to provide a source of young, mature, and veteran trees in the future. If we didn't plant any trees now, 30 years' time, 50 years' time, we would be struggling to get those those trees as our existing tree stock died off. And there's another reason for planting trees, and that's something which is, again, connected to carbon storage, and that's the biodiversity. And if you look at the priorities for biodiversity, you're looking at protecting habitats and keeping ancient trees higher up, and then planting young trees in order to replace those trees. It's quite complicated because some of the habitats that you might want to protect are things like peatland and moorland, and that may be ideal areas where you would normally plant trees. And the balance between capturing carbon for some of the habitats fall towards peatland rather than and soil storage rather than tree canopy cover storage. So, top is protecting existing mature trees. This is the one thing that, you know, they're removing carbon dioxide at our maximum rate. Habitats is often a long-term carbon sink. So peatlands, bogs, salt marsh, and there's various others that capture and store carbon long term. I think the other thing that I know Plymouth Tree Partnership are keen on with planting trees is it's not only planting them, they have to be cared for and managed as well. So at some stage, they may need to be pruned. At other stages, they may need to be thinned out. And then we come into longer term uses for wood, for a longer term capture of carbon. I mean, with the amount of tree planting that's happening at the moment, in 50 years' time, they will be capturing maximum amount of carbon dioxide. But if we're going for a net zero, carbon net zero, we'll have to continue planting trees in order to reach that net zero. And as trees get cut down or die, then replacing those trees will not act towards our net zero. So we are, with net zero and planting trees, just delaying the problem down the line. Okay, it may be 50 years, 100 years down the line, but it is just pushing it down the line. And I've put on the bottom here, better legislation, planning and management of trees, woodlands and forestry. I think we're only just getting to grips with this, and there's some really good legislation and planning and woodland management happening at the moment. There's also a lot of not so good management, not such good legislation, and the fact that the legislation and management is changing quite rapidly in some respects is not good, because we should be looking more towards the tree timescales of 50 to 100 years plus, rather than our timescales, which tends to rotate around 5-year plans. Okay. So should we plant trees? Well, I suppose we should plant trees, but we need to know why we're planting trees. And we should plant trees not for reducing carbon dioxide now, but for reducing carbon dioxide in the future. And it really only starts 30 years down the line. It's best 50 years down the line. So what we're doing now is removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere 30, 50 years time. So that's the summary. And I suppose the bottom line there, we need to do all of these things to maximize carbon dioxide retention. We can't just rely on one thing. planting trees is not the silver bullet that's going to cure our climate change problem. We need to do all of these to
I think I got
tackle the problem.
last time I was here.
Okay.
Sorry about this. Trying to get Barbara to mute.
Right. Any questions? Do you want to stop sharing now?
Yeah, if you put the host back to me, then I can manage the questions.
So stop share.
Should work.
How do I do that?
You click on my picture.
Right. Okay, on your picture itself, is it?
Yeah.
Make host, yes.
Hopefully that should work.
Okay. That was quite a race through options for trees to capture carbon, but it does. I think you do need to think about what you're doing when you're actually planting trees, and I'm not sure that that's got through to everybody yet. I see there's a few questions in the chat.
Yep.
Photosynthesis, yeah. Sorry about that. Food production growing mushrooms? Yeah. I mean, food productions for trees. I was thinking more about fruit and nuts, but yeah, mushrooms, oyster mushrooms, very nice. Okay.
Okay. Has anybody got any questions, any comments they'd like to make? Because it's pretty obvious that, okay, it's great to have trees planted, but the one thing that we've always got to bear in mind that this needs a 30 to 50 year strategy, with those saplings going in now, being managed and cared for. And I think that's one of the things that has been significantly missing from a lot of the progress that's been made on tree planting. It's been noted nationally, it's been noted locally as well. So any questions, anybody?
Yes, Jenny?
Jenny?
It's a comment, really. A lot of scientists now seem to be advocating the fact that grasslands actually support a lot of carbon capture. So I think we tend to sort of focus on trees and forget that grassland and lawns and things and our gardens actually can do a lot more. And, you know, we mustn't forget that. That's all I wanted to say. And thank you very much, Dave. Brilliant.
Yeah, I think a lot of these habitats will capture carbon, but you have to look at how much they capture over what period of time and how much they retain it as well. And grasslands, if it's grasslands that's mown for hay, then they may not be retaining the carbon dioxide so much as other grasslands. And there's lots of habitats that do capture carbon. I think Hugh has got the question: is there anything else on land that is better and quicker at capturing carbon? Better? Well, some people say that seagrass is particularly good at capturing carbon. Certainly, salt marshes and muddy areas, because mud tends to stop the decay of plants, so it stops the release of the carbon that goes down into the mud, and that can keep carbon in the mud, so keeps it away from the atmosphere longer. But generally, trees are. I suppose algae in the sea can capture huge quantities of carbon dioxide, but trees generally are one of the main means of getting carbon out of the atmosphere.
That's interesting. Sam has put, definitely a good idea to be recording ancient trees in the hope we can protect them. Do we have many ancient trees in Plymouth?
We have a few. The one that springs to mind is the Copplethorne oak out at Temerton Foliot, which is recorded on the Ancient Tree Inventory, and the Woodland Trust run a recording system for these, the Ancient Tree Inventory. It's worth having a look at if you want to look at some old or notable or mature trees in your area. Go and have a look at those and zoom in on your particular location. All I would say about that is that it's dependent on the recording. So, for instance, Saltram has got a huge number of trees recorded as either veteran or ancient. They have got a large number of ancient and veteran trees there, but they've also managed to record all of them. Whereas Honick Knoll has got very few, but in fact I know that there are trees in Honick Knoll that are ancient and veteran, but are just not recorded. And anybody can record onto the Ancient Tree Inventory. You just have to register, log in, and measure up your tree. There's lots of good information about how to do that. And then it gets checked by somebody to make sure the data is right before it goes live. Okay.
I think Saltram is one or more ancient trees. There are many veteran trees around, and the 3 in Central Park. We just don't know what we've got around us unless we look. And I think that's one of the most important things. There's also, Marcus has put in the Art and Energy Group have got a project which is promoting growing moss on Dartmoor, which was on the television a couple of nights ago. I can probably get some information from Jenny to add into the newsletter on that one. But again, it's another means of promoting carbon capture in different ways for different locations and different environments.
Yeah, certainly. Sphagnum moss is fantastic for peat, and that is particularly good for carbon capture and locking the carbon up. But again, what you have to do is look at the mass. If you have a look at how big the moss is, it's nowhere near as big as a tree. So it's not capturing as much carbon.
No.
What it is doing is it's potentially locking it up better because it's going down into the peat, which keeps it locked up. So, although it's not so good for capturing it, it may be better at a long-term, centuries or thousands of years of storage.
Okay, some comments there. Sheila has put in the old oak in Widey Woods.
That's a Luscombe oak. It's on the Ancient Tree Inventory. It's definitely one to visit. Fascinating tree.
Right. Question: moving forward, should the council look towards a blanket tree preservation order? Interesting question.
The Woodland Trust are trying to get the veteran and ancient trees protected, not so much with TPOs, but with new legislation. I know a lot of tree surgeons would like every tree to have a TPO on them because they would then know the process to go and check the tree before they fell it. And at the moment, they could be contravening TPOs without knowing it, because they tend to rely on the customer to check that there's a TPO or not.
Right. Okay.
Let's see. Who else we got here? We did have one. Woodland Trust recommend we check veteran ancient trees and then apply to have each one made a TPO. Yeah. If you can, certainly if they're on private land, you can ask the council to apply a TPO. If they're on council land, the council will generally not put TPOs on trees on their own land, because the answer that the council give me is that they are considered responsible landowners and wouldn't fell trees that are ancient or veteran. Whether you believe that or not, with what's happened recently, that's